No, don't worry, my voice is back. I've been cured. It's a miracle. This video is about proving that God does not exist. I'm going to prove to you that God does not exist. Okay? Actually, no, I'm not. Because I can't. Because unfortunately, nobody can prove that God does not exist. And that sounds a bit of a defeatist attitude coming from an atheist, but it's true. You can't actually prove that anything doesn't exist. It's trying to prove a negative, which you cannot do. To prove that something does not exist, you would have to inspect every single particle in the entire universe. God could be anywhere. He could be hiding in the cupboard. He could be under the stairs. He could even be in the closet. Or God could have come out of the closet and he could be hiding a billion light years away, somewhere we could never ever look. So we can't prove that God doesn't exist. So what does that mean? It actually means nothing. It means nothing. Because we can't prove that fairies don't exist. We can't prove that unicorns don't exist. We can't even prove that the dodo, which we think went extinct several hundred years ago, we can't prove that the dodo is extinct, because until we look under every bush, in every wood, in every forest, every park, on every piece of land in the whole world, and there are places in the world which we haven't explored, we won't know for sure that the dodo is really extinct. But surely we'd know that the dodo is extinct, don't we? We know that a live dodo no longer exists. Do we? We say we do, but the only reason we say that the dodo is extinct is there's no evidence. There's no evidence that there are any more living dodos on the planet. Nobody's seen one, nobody's heard one, we haven't found any dodo feathers, we haven't found any dodo poo, nothing. So a lack of evidence makes us believe that the dodo isn't there. So what about God? How much evidence is there that God exists? How many people have seen him recently? How many people have heard his voice? Or recorded it so that we can prove that he's there? I could give you a long list of things like that. By scientific standards, is there any evidence at all that God exists? There is no evidence that I know of that God exists. But does that mean he doesn't exist? No. It doesn't prove that he doesn't exist, because again, we haven't inspected every single particle in the universe. We cannot 100% guarantee that God does not exist. But by every standard of proof that we have, and by every reasonable standard that we use to prove other things, we should, in the same way that we conclude that the dodo doesn't exist anymore, we should logically conclude that God, on the balance of probabilities, almost certainly does not exist. And for the same reason, this also means that Zeus might exist, but he almost certainly doesn't exist. Thor, the Viking god of thunder, might exist, but again, he almost certainly doesn't. Even Santa Claus himself that great bearded man. He might exist. He really might exist. Obviously, he's not at the North Pole, because we've checked. But he could be somewhere up in space. Somewhere we haven't looked. You cannot prove that Santa Claus doesn't exist. It's possible. It's remotely possible, but it's still possible. But we still say that Santa Claus almost certainly does not exist. The fact that atheists can't prove that God does not exist seems like a big victory for Christians and Jews and Muslims. They'll probably be thankful for an atheist admitting that. But it's not a big victory for religion. Just because you can't prove something doesn't exist doesn't automatically mean that it does exist. You've got to ask the question, is it likely that God exists? Because given all the evidence, and there's very little evidence for, and there's a mass of evidence against God existing, it really, truly isn't likely that God exists. Nobody witnesses miracles. Praying does not cure the sick. It simply does not. How many people with amputated limbs have been prayed for and the limb has magically grown back? None. People who say that God has physically appeared before them and spoken to them, there are a few of those people, but they're regarded as complete psychos. We say that they're mad, delusional. Even religious people who you'd think would give them the benefit of the doubt, they're not believed by religious people either. But these religious people still dance around saying, aha, you can't prove there's no God. We win. We win. Yay. So let me ask these same religious people a question. This is to Christians and Muslims and Jews. There is a reason it's not addressed to Hindus, which will become obvious. All the people who believe in one God, can you prove that there isn't more than one God? Because to prove that no other God exists, you've got the same burden of proof that atheists have. You would have to inspect every single atom in the universe until you knew with absolute certainty that a second God, or even 10 or 20 gods, didn't exist. Until you can prove that there are no other gods, you cannot prove that the God you believe in is the only one out there. And for Christians, Jews and Muslims, that's one of the basic statements of their religion, that there is only one God. But there could be 100. There could be 1,000. If you watch my video about intelligent design, there could be whole teams of gods. Great factories in the sky building all the animals and plants and people. But is it likely? No. Almost certainly, more than one God does not exist. But for exactly the same reasons, it is almost certain that no God exists at all.